Hello everyone, welcome to the Science Christian Guy, where we explore the intersection of faith, science, and reason. Today I'm responding to Joe Bart's video, Why I Don't Believe in God. He raises some important questions about morality, the soul, the afterlife, and whether faith is rational. As someone who values both logic and faith, I want to engage with these ideas thoughtfully and respectfully, not just to argue, but to invite a deeper discussion. I have actually never heard of Joe Bart before. His video came up in the recommendation for me, so I thought I would check it out. Seems like a nice guy. Before anyone thinks I'm just going to dismiss Joe's claims and trash his views, let me point out that I am also totally open-minded to people's different insights on how they respond to complex topics like this. It's something that isn't super easy to talk about and is personal, so I really respect his intellectual honesty and just putting it out there despite what other people might think. Everyone, including Christians, has doubt, and let me just say, that's totally normal. Nobody should feel judged because someone else thinks their view is wrong. It's a totally normal part of the journey for someone trying to find their faith and ultimately get the answers of why we are here in the first place. Before I get into the main points, let me just state that I also value philosophy, reason, and evidence, and I want to get the main point across that Christianity isn't just about blind faith. With that out of the way, let's dive in. One of the objections Joe brings up is that morality is individually objective, but universally subjective. This means that we all have our own moral views, but there's no ultimate right or wrong. But let's think this through logically. If morality is entirely subjective, then no action, no matter how horrific, can be said to be truly evil. It would just be wrong in my opinion, and that's a dangerous road. Take genocide, for example. If morality is subjective, then we can't say that something like the Holocaust was objectively evil. We could say, I don't like it, or my culture disagrees with it, but we'd have no higher standard to say it was universally wrong. And yet, deep down, we all know that genocide isn't just wrong for me, it's evil, period. Even if an entire society justified it, it would still be wrong. The fact that we feel this way suggests morality isn't just a social construct, it's something real, something that exists beyond human opinion. Another example is slavery. Some societies in the past believed slavery was acceptable, but today we recognize that slavery is fundamentally wrong. If morality were truly subjective, then we couldn't say past societies were wrong, just different. But we don't actually believe that, do we? We look at history and say, no, that was always wrong and those societies were mistaken. That only makes sense if there's an objective moral law that exists outside of human opinions. Now at this point, I know someone will say, but the Bible condones slavery. If objective morality exists, why did God allow slavery in the past? That's an important question and it deserves a thoughtful answer. Let's break it down really quick. When people hear the word slavery, they immediately think of race-based, brutal chattel slavery, like what happened in the transatlantic slave trade, but that's not the same thing as the types of servitude described in the Bible. In many ancient societies, what is called slavery in English was actually indentured servitude, a way for people to work off debts. Many people in the ancient world sold themselves into servitude willingly to survive economic hardship, and they had rights and protections under Jewish law. In Old Testament Israel, servants were freed after 6 years, and kidnapping people into slavery was punishable by death. So when skeptics say the Bible condones slavery, we have to ask, what kind of slavery are we talking about? Because biblical servitude was nothing like the brutal race-based slavery that we rightly condemn today. Some will still say, but why didn't God just abolish slavery outright? The key thing is to understand that the Bible often regulates practices without outright abolishing them immediately. This is because of human hardness of heart and cultural realities of the time. Jesus made this exact point when people asked him about divorce. He said Moses permitted you to divorce because of your hardened hearts, but from the beginning it was not so. In other words, God sometimes permits things in a fallen world while still moving humanity toward a better moral ideal. And that's exactly what we see happening with slavery. The Old Testament lays out humane regulations for servitude. The New Testament under Christ plants the seed for its abolition by teaching that all people are equal before God. Paul tells slave masters to treat their servants as brothers, and he declares there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. That idea directly led to Christian abolitionist movements centuries later. If Christianity truly condoned slavery, why was it Christians who led the charge to abolish it? Think of William Wilberforce in England or the abolitionist movements in the US. They weren't arguing from atheism or secularism, but from the belief that all humans are created in God's image. This is why we look at slavery today and say it was always wrong, because the truth is God never wanted slavery. He was working through history to bring people out of it. Now, back to the main point of this. If morality is just a human construct, why is slavery wrong at all? If morality is subjective, then it was simply a social norm in past societies, and we have no objective basis to judge them. But deep down, we all know slavery is truly objectively wrong. That only makes sense if there's a real moral law, one that comes from a moral lawgiver. If you reject God, you have no solid foundation for saying slavery was ever wrong in the first place. The fact that we all know it was always evil is yet another reason to believe in objective morality, and in the God who gives it to us. Joe acknowledges that morality is important for society, but he believes it's just something humans created to function better. But here's the problem. If morality were purely a human invention, why do we instinctively feel that certain things are truly good or evil beyond just what our culture teaches us? Imagine you witness a person torturing a child for fun. You don't need a book, a law, or philosophical argument to know that's evil. It's a gut reaction. It's written into us. Now, let's ask, if morality is just a social construct, why does this feeling exist across all cultures, all time periods? Why does it feel more like a discovery rather than an invention? Some might argue that our moral instincts evolved over time for survival, but evolution only explains what is, not what ought to be. Evolution might explain why we cooperate as a species, but it can't explain why we feel we should do good even when it goes against our own self-interest. Think about this. If you see someone drowning and you jump in to save them, even at a risk to your own life, what evolutionary advantage does that give you? Evolution would favor self-preservation, not self-sacrifice. Yet we admire acts of selfless courage. We feel a sense of duty to do good even when there's no benefit to us. Where does that come from? The best explanation is that morality isn't just a human invention. It's grounded in something higher, and if objective morality exists, it requires an objective source, something beyond human opinion. In other words, like we've talked about, a moral lawgiver. This aligns perfectly with what Christianity teaches, that God has written His moral law into our hearts. Joe and many others argue that morality is subjective, but when we really examine our deepest convictions, we see that we treat morality as objective every single day. We hold people accountable, we recognize injustice, we say things like, this is wrong no matter what anyone thinks. That's not subjective morality, that's objective morality in action. The only question left is, where does it come from? I'll leave you with this. If you truly believe morality is subjective, then ask yourself, could you ever accept a world where something like genocide is okay, just because a society says so? If the answer is no, then deep down, you already recognize morality isn't just a human invention. It's something real, and if it's real, it has a real source, something or someone beyond us. Joe also argues that humans are just lucky animals not specifically designed by God. First, let's establish a simple fact. Humans are not just quantitatively different from animals, we are qualitatively different, meaning it's not just that we're smarter, we have capabilities that are totally unique in the natural world. Let's look at some clear distinctions. We have metacognition. We don't just experience things, we reflect on our own existence. Humans can think about thinking, analyze our own consciousness, and question reality itself. We engage in abstract reasoning. We don't just learn patterns like animals. We develop mathematical systems, logic, and philosophy. We ask why questions. Unlike animals that simply react to stimuli, humans seek explanations, contemplate the universe, and explore ultimate truths. Sure, animals exhibit some problem-solving skills. A chimpanzee might use a tool and a dolphin might recognize itself in a mirror. But no animal builds skyscrapers, debates philosophy, composes symphonies, or searches for the meaning of life. That's a fundamentally human trait. Humans don't just act based on survival instincts. We develop moral systems and hold ourselves accountable to ethical principles. This is a massive distinction between us and every other species. Humans make moral judgments. We recognize concepts like justice, guilt, and fairness on a universal level. We create laws based on moral reasoning. No animal has developed an ethical system with principles like human rights, charity, or self-sacrifice. We care for the weak. In nature, the weak are left behind. But humans build hospitals, care for the elderly, and sacrifice for others. There's also things to take into consideration such as creativity and artistic expression. Humans create for beauty, not just utility. We make music, paint masterpieces, write poetry, we tell stories with meaning. Every culture has myths, epics, and narratives that explain human purpose. We build civilizations, not just nests. While beavers make dams and birds build nests, Humans create societies with culture, philosophy, and technology that transcend basic survival. If humans were just animals, why would we bother making art, music, or literature? Evolution doesn't need these things for survival, yet they're deeply ingrained in us. This suggests we're made for something greater than mere survival. Even if we accept that humans are different from animals, that doesn't explain why we have an innate longing for meaning, purpose, and eternity. If we are purely biological beings, why do we crave something beyond the physical? Every culture throughout history has sought a higher purpose. We naturally ask about the meaning of life, even when it's inconvenient. We long for eternity, even when we intellectually deny it. Joe Bart argues that humans just got lucky in evolution, but if that's true, why aren't we satisfied with just living and dying? Why do we feel like we were made for more? Why do atheists themselves often struggle with the fear of meaninglessness? Could it be because we were designed for something greater? Think about it like this. Every civilization in human history has believed in something beyond themselves. Whether it's ancient Egyptians, Hindus, Buddhists, Greeks, or Christians, humanity instinctively reaches for something higher. Even secular worldviews replace God with things like the universe or humanity's progression. Why? Because we're wired for transcendence. C.S. Lewis put it this way: if we find in ourselves a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most reasonable explanation is that we were made for another world. Just like hunger points to the reality of food and thirst points to the reality of water, our longing for eternity points to the reality of God. Even in secular cultures today, people struggle with a meaning crisis. Why? Because no matter how much science explains about the world, it can't tell us why we're here or what we're meant for. Christianity doesn't reject science or evolution. In fact, it gives us a framework for understanding why evolution might have occurred, with purpose. The Bible teaches that God created humans in His image, meaning we are fundamentally different from animals. We have rationality because God is rational. We have morality because God is moral. We seek meaning because we were made by a meaningful being. Even if evolution was the process, the destination was intentional. Christianity doesn't deny that humans developed biologically. It just says we were meant to become who we are. So are humans just another animal that got lucky? The evidence says otherwise. Our ability to reason, create, love, and seek meaning points to something beyond mere biology. Science itself recognizes that humans are in a class of their own, far beyond any other species. And if we are so different, the best explanation is that we were made for something more, not by accident, but by design. If you truly believe humans are just lucky animals, ask yourself this: why do you even care about meaning, truth, or justice? Why do you long for something more? Maybe it's because you were never meant to be just another animal. Maybe you were meant for something greater. Joe's next belief is that consciousness is just brain activity and that death is the end. Before we assume that consciousness is just brain activity, let's acknowledge something that even the top neuroscientists admit. We don't fully understand what consciousness is. Consciousness is not fully explained by brain activity. While neuroscience can identify correlations between brain function and thoughts, it still cannot explain why subjective experience exists. Philosopher David Chalmers coined this term to describe the mystery of how and why physical brain activity creates subjective experience. Why seeing the color red feels like something. Even secular scientists acknowledge the gap. Physicist Roger Penrose and neuroscientist Christoph Koch, hope I pronounced that right, they both argue that consciousness may involve something beyond classical physics. If consciousness were just electrical signals in the brain, why do we have an internal first-person experience that goes beyond mere computation? Computers can process data, but they don't have an inner world. That alone suggests consciousness is something more than just neurons firing. Now, let's talk about one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that consciousness isn't tied only to the brain: near-death experiences, or NDEs. These are cases where people report vivid, sometimes verifiable experiences while clinically dead, when brain activity should be absent or severely impaired. Dr. Bruce Grayson, one of the leading researchers on NDEs, has documented numerous cases where patients reported accurate details of events while unconscious, things they should not have been able to perceive. Dr. Sam Parnia conducted studies on cardiac arrest patients and found that some had detailed conscious experiences during periods when their brain showed no measurable activity. Some NDE cases involve people blind from birth describing visual experiences during their near-death state. This should be impossible if consciousness is purely brain-based. Some skeptics claim that NDEs are just hallucinations, but here's the problem. Many of these experiences involve people seeing things outside their body that are later verified by doctors or family members. A good example would be the shoe on the hospital roof. A woman who had an NDE described seeing a specific shoe on the roof of the hospital, which was later found exactly as she described. There are even surgical operations as well, where patients report witnessing details of their own surgery, including instruments used, conversations between doctors, and events they could not have known from their physical position. If NDEs were just brain-generated hallucinations, how do we explain cases where people perceive real-world events while their brain is clinically inactive? The simplest explanation is that consciousness can exist independently of the body. Let's go even deeper. If you are just your brain, then everything you think, feel, and believe is just a byproduct of chemicals and neurons. But that leads to some serious philosophical problems. If the brain is just a machine following physical laws and all of your thoughts are predetermined, that means your belief that there is no afterlife isn't based on reasoning, it's just what your brain chemicals force you to think. But if we truly have free will, that means we are more than just physical matter. It means there's something immaterial about us. Think about it. If your brain is just a biological machine, then you don't actually exist. Only chemical reactions do. But that's not how we live our lives. We intuitively know that we have agency, that I am not just a brain, I am me. So, if consciousness can exist beyond the brain, what does that mean? If we are not just biological machines, then we must be something more. We must have a soul. The Bible teaches that humans are both body and soul. Jesus himself spoke of the afterlife. Our deep longing for eternity isn't an illusion, it's a clue. We weren't meant for something beyond death. Why do we instinctively feel like life shouldn't just end? If God is real and we are spiritual beings, then our longing for eternity is not just wishful thinking. It's a signpost pointing to reality. The fact that we even contemplate an afterlife sets us apart from animals and suggests that we were created for something beyond this temporary life. So, is consciousness just brain activity, and does it end when we die? Based on the evidence, I would say the answer is no. If God is all-loving, why does hell exist? And why would a loving God send people there? Joe Bart argues that the concept of hell is nothing more than a tool to manipulate people into belief. Something designed to keep people in line through fear, but is that really what Christianity teaches? Now, I do agree that some people believe in God off of just fear, and that's a shame because it really shouldn't be like that. One of the biggest misconceptions about Christianity is that it's all about do this or you'll go to hell. But that's not the message of Jesus at all. Jesus didn't go around preaching, fear hell and follow me. He preached, come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest. Christianity isn't about escaping punishment. It's about restoring a broken relationship with God. The core message of Christianity is love, not fear. Eternal life is about knowing God, not just avoiding hell. Jesus' primary focus was calling people into a relationship, not scaring them away from punishment. If Christianity were just about avoiding hell, Jesus' teachings would have been fear-driven, but instead, he spoke about love, grace, and restoring people to God. The message of the gospel is not follow the rules so you don't burn. It's come back to the one who created and loves you. One of Joe's biggest issues with hell is the idea that God sends people there. But let's rethink this. What if hell is not a place where God actively punishes people, but rather a place where people end up when they reject the source of life itself? God is the source of life, love, and goodness. If someone rejects God, they are choosing to separate themselves from life, love, and goodness. That separation is what we call hell. C.S. Lewis put it this way: doors of hell are locked from the inside. In other words, people in hell aren't there because God threw them in. They're there because they rejected God and chose separation. God respects free will so much that he won't force himself on people who don't want him. Imagine you're invited to a wedding banquet filled with joy, laughter, music, and the people who love you most. But instead of accepting, you say, no, I don't want to go. The doors close and now you're outside in the dark, alone. Did the host send you away or did you refuse the invitation? That's how hell works. It's not about God sending people there. It's about people choosing to be apart from him. Joe argues that hell is unfair and manipulative, but let's take a step back. If God is the source of everything good, life, love, joy, meaning, then what happens if you separate yourself from him? You're left with the absence of all those things. That's what hell is. Hell is not just fire and torment. It's a complete absence of God's presence. If God is light, hell is darkness. If God is love, hell is the absence of love. If God is joy, hell is despair. Hell isn't some medieval torture chamber where God takes pleasure in punishing people. and simply the natural consequence of rejecting the only source of true goodness. Jesus' purpose was not condemnation, but salvation. God doesn't delight in people going to hell. He desires that everyone would come to Him. The cross is the greatest proof that God doesn't want anyone to be lost. If Christianity was just about manipulation, why would God go to the extreme of sacrificing Himself? That's not manipulation, that's love in its purest form. Here's the real question. If heaven is being with God forever, do you even want that? Many people assume they will go to heaven just because they lived a good life, but heaven isn't about being good, it's about wanting to be with God. If you spend your whole life avoiding God, why would you suddenly want to be with Him for eternity? If you reject His love, why would you expect to experience it in the afterlife? Heaven is about a relationship with God. Hell is about rejecting that relationship. This is why hell exists, not as punishment, but as choice. If someone spends their whole life saying, "I don't want God," God ultimately honors that decision. But separation from the source of life is not paradise, it's emptiness, and that's what we call hell. Before we go deeper, it's important to acknowledge that people have different ideas of hell. Some imagine it as a literal lake of fire, others as complete separation from God, and some see it as a temporary purification before ultimate redemption. The Bible gives us imagery about hell, but the key theme remains the same. Hell is the place where evil and rebellion against God are fully dealt with. Some Christians believe hell is eternal conscious torment. Some believe hell is annihilation, the complete destruction of the wicked. I won't go too far into my own views because that's a video topic of itself. But regardless of the exact nature of hell, the fundamental truth remains. God is loving, but He is also just. Evil does not go unpunished. Many people, including Joe, argue that hell seems unfair if it's just eternal torment for finite sins. Others say hell is simply separation from God like we talked about, but the truth is, it's both. Hell is separation from God because God is the source of life, love, and goodness. Rejecting Him leads to the absence of all those things, which is hell. But hell is also punishment. God's justice means that evil must be held accountable, sin has real consequences, and rejecting God's mercy leads to righteous judgment. Think of it like this: if someone commits terrible crimes in society, murder, abuse, corruption, should they be separated from the rest of us, or should there also be justice? We all know that evil requires punishment. The same is true in the spiritual realm. Many people struggle with the idea of hell because they assume a loving God wouldn't allow punishment, but that misunderstands the nature of love. A truly loving God must also be just. God's love means He offers forgiveness to all. God's justice means evil must be punished. Rejecting God's forgiveness results in facing His justice. Think about a human judge. If a criminal stands before a judge and is genuinely remorseful, the judge might show mercy, but if the criminal is unrepentant, defiant, and continues harming others, justice demands consequences. God is both merciful and just. He offers forgiveness, but He doesn't let evil go unchecked. At this point, some will ask, why doesn't God just forgive everyone and get rid of hell? The answer is, He already made a way for everyone to be forgiven. God offers salvation freely to all, but love cannot be forced. God won't force people into heaven if they don't want Him. Those who reject His offer ultimately face the consequences of their choice. Hell exists not because God is cruel, but because He respects free will. A world without justice would be a world where evil wins. That's not the world God created. That's why the final judgment exists, to ensure that evil does not go unpunished. The most important thing to understand about hell is that God doesn't want anyone to go there. Jesus' entire mission was to save us from separation from God. Another common misconception, even among Christians, is that hell is one single place of equal suffering for all who are there. But biblically, there's evidence that God's judgment considers each person's heart, actions, and circumstances. Look at in Luke chapter 12, verses 47 through 48. Jesus teaches that punishment is proportional. The servant who knew his master's will and did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating, but the one who did not know and did what deserved the beating will receive a light beating. This clearly shows that different people experience different consequences. A person who knowingly rejects God's truth is judged differently from someone who never had the opportunity to know Him. In Matthew chapter 11, verses 20 through 24, Jesus says some cities will be judged more harshly than others. It will be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. This implies that some will experience a harsher fate based on how much truth they rejected. This means someone like Adolf Hitler, who knowingly committed mass murder and cruelty, will not experience the same judgment as someone like your grandmother, who simply never knew Jesus. God is just. He doesn't treat all sin and all people the same way. One of the most troubling questions about hell is this: what about people who never had the chance to know Jesus? What about those who lived before the gospel was preached? Are they automatically doomed? The answer is no, because God judges people based on what they knew and how they responded to that knowledge. In Romans chapter 2, verses 14 through 16, people who don't know the law are judged by their conscience. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. This suggests that people who never heard the gospel are judged by how they responded to their God-given moral conscience. People who genuinely sought truth, justice, and goodness are not judged the same as those who knowingly rejected God. Greater knowledge means greater responsibility. Think of James chapter 4, verse 17. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. The more someone knows about God and rejects Him, the greater their accountability. This means an atheist who deliberately fights against God's truth is in a different category from someone who never heard of Jesus. God is not unfair. He considers each person's situation and judges them fairly, not arbitrarily. If hell is not just one place of equal punishment for all, then what does the Bible suggest about different levels of judgment? While the details are mysterious, we can infer that there are degrees of separation and punishment. Some people think of Dante's depiction of hell, where sinners are placed in specific levels based on their sins. While this is not biblical, the idea that not everyone experiences the same afterlife is consistent with Scripture. Those who committed great evil will face greater consequences than those who simply rejected faith. One of the most debated questions in theology is whether hell is eternal or whether God ultimately redeems people who seek Him even after death. While traditional Christian belief holds that hell is final, some scholars suggest that some forms of judgment may be temporary, leading to eventual restoration. This is a view called Christian universalism or annihilationism. The bottom line is this: God knows each person's heart. The idea that He would treat a kind grandmother the same way He treats a mass murderer is not biblical. It's a misconception. God's judgment is fair, and His love is greater than we can imagine. So, is hell just a scare tactic to manipulate people? No. It's a natural result of rejecting the source of all goodness. If you struggle with the idea of hell, ask yourself, if heaven is about being with God forever, do you actually want that? If not, then what's the alternative? God has given us a choice. We will choose life or we will choose separation. The choice is ours, but eternity is real. What kind of God would you expect? One who judges everyone exactly the same, or one who looks at each person's life, heart, and knowledge? The biblical God is not unfair. He sees you, He knows you, and offers mercy to all who seek Him. He is not a one-size-fits-all punishment. It is a consequence of rejecting Him, but no one has to go there. The choice is ours. Joe's next point is that he just cannot believe without evidence. When people say, I need evidence before I believe, what they often mean is, I need the kind of evidence I personally expect. But faith is not about believing something without reason. It's about following the evidence where it leads. In fact, we have faith in everyday life without thinking about it. You trust a chair will hold you up before sitting down. You trust a pilot will fly a plane safely, even if you've never met them. Faith is not belief without evidence. It's rational trust based on prior knowledge. The same applies to God. Faith is trusting in what the evidence points to, not believing despite the evidence. One of the strongest pieces of historical evidence for Christianity is the resurrection of Jesus. Joe says he needs evidence, so let's talk about evidence that has convinced even skeptical historians. What do scholars agree on? The first thing is that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. His tomb was empty. Many of his followers claimed to have seen him alive after his death. And the disciples were willing to die for this claim. Even non-Christian historians acknowledge these historical facts, so what makes the most sense? Did the disciples lie? Unlikely, because people don't die for what they know is false. Was it a hallucination? Hallucinations don't happen to multiple people in different places and times. Did Jesus actually rise? This is the simplest explanation that accounts for all the facts. When people demand proof of Christianity, they often ignore that the resurrection has more historical support than many ancient events we accept today, without question. If Jesus truly rose, that changes everything. Even if someone isn't convinced by history, they still have to explain why anything exists at all. And this is where philosophical arguments for God's existence become important. This is something Joe has also said would be more convincing for him anyway. The first piece of evidence I will point to is the cosmological argument. Why is there something rather than nothing? Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Science confirms the universe had a beginning, which was the Big Bang. If time, space, and matter had a beginning, their cause must be beyond time, space, and matter. This fits perfectly with the idea of an eternal, uncaused creator. If Joe is waiting for evidence, here it is. The very existence of the universe points to a creator. The next piece of evidence is the fine-tuning argument. Physics has over 30 constants. There's gravity, electromagnetism, etc., perfectly set for life to exist. If any were slightly different, the universe would collapse or be uninhabitable. Chance doesn't explain this level of precision. Design does. If you see a watch in the sand, you don't assume it appeared by accident. You assume it was designed. Why? Because order and purpose suggest intelligence. The universe is infinitely more complex than a watch, so why assume it's an accident? Then there is the moral argument that I brought up already. To rephrase for structural purposes, if objective morality exists, God must exist. Objective morality does exist. Murder, slavery, abuse are truly wrong. Therefore, God must exist. Atheists can act morally, but they can't explain why morality exists objectively without God. If morality is just a human invention, then we can't say genocide or slavery are truly wrong, just socially unacceptable. But deep down, we know some things are always wrong. That suggests a moral lawgiver. Joe says he can't believe without evidence, but what about millions of people who claim real experiences with God? Are they lying or deluded, or is something real happening? Millions have reported dramatic life changes after encountering Jesus. Near-death experiences often involve encounters with a loving divine presence. People from different cultures, even atheists, claim visions of Christ. Doctors have documented cases of miraculous healings with no medical explanation. People in persecuted countries claim visions and experiences that lead them to Christ. Even atheists who seek truth often find themselves drawn to faith unexpectedly. If Joe is waiting for scientific evidence, how does he explain countless lives transformed by faith? If God is real, we should expect him to be encountered, and millions claim they have. Joe says he can't force himself to believe, and I agree, you shouldn't just force belief. Faith isn't about forcing anything, it's about following the evidence where it leads. Faith is not the opposite of reason, it's what comes after reason. For example, in marriage, you don't have 100% proof your spouse will always be faithful, but based on evidence like their character, history, trust, you commit in faith. The same is true with God. We weigh the evidence and then we trust. We don't require absolute proof for anything in life. We base our beliefs on the best available evidence. The evidence for Christianity is strong, historically, philosophically, and experientially. If Joe's looking for 100% scientific proof of God, he's setting an impossible standard, one that we don't even use for history, morality, or daily life. But if he looks at the evidence honestly, he'll see that faith isn't wishful thinking, it's a rational conclusion. If you're waiting for absolute proof before believing in God, ask yourself, do you demand absolute proof for everything else in life, or do you follow the best available evidence? The case for God is strong. Are you willing to follow where it leads? The last point that Joe got into that I will talk about is this. Joe argues that Christianity, like all religion, is just a human-made coping mechanism, a way to explain what we don't understand and bring comfort in an unpredictable world. But if that were true, wouldn't we expect Christianity to be built around human desires rather than challenging them? Wouldn't it tell us exactly what we want to hear? The idea that religion is just a psychological crutch assumes that people create belief systems to suit their desires. But Christianity doesn't offer a convenient, self-serving worldview. It calls us to do things that go directly against our natural inclinations. Humans naturally seek comfort, power, and self-interest. Christianity calls us to sacrifice, humility, and self-control. Why would humans invent a religion that tells them to reject their own desires? If Christianity were just a coping mechanism, it would encourage indulgence, not self-denial. The fact that it challenges human nature suggests that it is not man-made, but divine. Christianity also teaches that you should also love your enemies, not just your friends. The natural human tendency is to love those who love you, hate those who hurt you. Christianity flips this on its head. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, it says to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. No other major belief system goes this far in demanding radical forgiveness. Why invent a belief system that makes life harder rather than easier? If Christianity were just a comforting illusion, why would it ask us to love people who betray us? Why would it demand something so unnatural? If religion were just a coping mechanism, wouldn't it excuse our worst behaviors instead of condemning them? Christianity holds us accountable to a higher standard, even when it's uncomfortable. Even lustful thoughts are considered sinful. If Christianity were a human construct, wouldn't it be designed to justify our desires rather than restrain them? A human-made religion would tell us, you're fine just the way you are. Christianity tells us you need to be transformed. That's not the message of a wishful fantasy, that's the message of truth. Joe says Christianity is just a human-made belief to help us cope, but if atheism is true, if the universe is nothing but atoms and natural processes, then why should we care about truth, morality, or meaning at all? Atheism offers no reason why we should value truth. If everything is just a product of blind evolution, what makes truth more valuable than falsehood? Why does the search for truth matter in a meaningless universe? If Christianity were just a comforting myth, it wouldn't challenge us, it wouldn't demand self-denial, and it wouldn't make life harder. But it does. Why? Because it's not just a human invention, it's truth. And truth isn't always convenient, but it's always necessary. Christianity isn't about making life easier, it's about revealing reality. The fact that Christianity demands things we don't naturally want is evidence that it's not man-made. Our longing for meaning, justice, and eternity makes sense if God is real, but not if we're just atoms. If Christianity were just a human construct, why does it go against human nature? Why does it demand self-sacrifice rather than self-indulgence? Why does it offer meaning when naturalism offers none? Maybe it's not just a coping mechanism, maybe it's the truth. Joe, if you're watching this, I appreciate your honesty in wrestling in these big questions. It takes real courage to put your doubts and thoughts out there, and I really respect that. You clearly care about truth, and that's why I wanted to respond, not to argue, not to win, but to challenge some of the assumptions about Christianity that I think might not be as solid as they seem. I don't expect you to just change your mind overnight, but I do want to ask you something. If Christianity were true, would you want to know? If God was real, not just a vague idea, but as a personal loving being, would you be open to that possibility? Because even if there's a chance that it's true, wouldn't it be worth looking deeper? I'm not asking you to just believe. I'm asking you to keep searching, keep testing. If Christianity is false, it will crumble under scrutiny, but if it's true, then it has real answers to the things you're struggling with. Truth, purpose, meaning, and even the question of why we long for those things in the first place. Faith isn't about shutting off your brain, it's about using it. Jesus himself said, "Seek and you will find." That's in Matthew chapter 7, verse 7, by the way. So if you're truly seeking truth, don't stop at skepticism. Go all the way. Read the Bible for yourself. Read the Gospels. Look at the evidence. Ask the hard questions because truth isn't afraid of being tested. This isn't about winning an argument. I'm not here to prove you wrong. This is about planting a seed, giving you reasons to reconsider, to look deeper, and to keep searching, because if God is real, if Jesus really rose from the dead, then the most important question isn't just whether Christianity is true, it's what you do with that truth. And Joe, I appreciate your mind for philosophy and your passion for seeking answers, but don't just search for ways to disprove Christianity. Search for the truth, wherever it leads, and if you ever want to have a conversation about it, I'd be happy to talk. To everyone watching, I leave you with this. If God is real, would you want to know? If so, don't stop searching. Truth isn't afraid of being tested, and I believe if you truly seek, you'll find more than you ever expected. Thanks for watching. Keep searching.